Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, what we challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, sometime later today in New York City, in Madison Square Garden, Trump will hold a very big rally. Now, the strange thing is that
But there was another very well-known historical
exactly, and so
event.
this has been taken as evidence that Trump is a Nazi, and you think, well, how does that work? Well, because in sometime in 1939, the sort of the German-American Bund held a rally in Madison Square Garden, the purpose of which was to urge the United States to stay out of the war, and this was immediately taken. Trump is holding a rally in Madison Square Garden. The Nazis held a rally in Madison Square Garden. Therefore, Trump is a Nazi. This is part of the sort of the Hitler wore pants thesis. You know, Trump wears pants, Hitler wore pants. Therefore, Trump is Hitler. Um, um, but what is also interesting is that when you say Madison Square Garden, most people think, okay, well, that was the scene of the great Ali Frazier fight of the century. It's a very famous arena. I mean, a lot of big things have happened at Madison Square Garden, but not just this rally in 1939. But nonetheless, it's part of this story that's been going around that Trump is an admirer of Hitler. Trump is obviously a fascist, wants to introduce fascism, but the source right now of the story of Trump equals Hitler is, not the sort of MSNBC kind of hysterical crowd, but American generals, and so there have been a number of stories emerged in the past few weeks. I mean, including Bob Woodward's book, in
Is
which
this the
the
October surprise?
could be,
Yeah.
could be, but it may well be that somehow Trump is kind of some sort of a Hitlerian. So I just want to look at a few of these stories that have been doing the rounds. And so the New York Times obviously has pride of place. And here was the a story which was based on a number of interviews with General John Kelly, who had been the Homeland Secretary under Trump and then worked as Chief of Staff under Trump, and he's been harboring a deep hatred for Trump for all these years, and has held these interviews with New York Times, with Bob Woodward, with Jeffrey Goldberg. We're going to talk about Jeffrey Goldberg in a bit, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, in which he's just denouncing Trump. And so here we have, as election nears, this is the New York Times, Kelly warns Trump would rule like a dictator. So that's been said, I don't know how many times. John Kelly, the Trump White House's longest-serving chief of staff, said that he believed that Donald Trump met the definition of a fascist.
Okay, let's look at the title. As election nears, Kelly warns Trump would rule like a dictator. Well, John Kelly, Trump was president. Did he
Right.
rule as a dictator?
Right. Exactly. Exactly right. And again, one's always puzzled about these things. Like, when you think, oh, he's going to be a dictator, how do you get to be a dictator in the United States? I mean, there are courts, a very complex network of courts, state courts, federal courts, lower courts, appellate courts, Supreme Courts, and you got the federal Supreme Courts, the state Supreme Courts. So you've got all these.
Yeah, and what
So
about
yeah, go.
what about your city police?
You're right, exactly. So you need some kind of a military and a police totally loyal to the president. So that the president is just going to ignore the rule of the courts. I don't know how he can do that. And again, we found that during his first term. I mean, he lost some cases in court. He always accepted those verdicts. I mean, he won some cases as well. So where was the evidence that at any time during that his first term he was a dictator? Um, Now, this is so he, being Kelly said that in his opinion, Mr. Trump met the definition of a fascist, would govern like a dictator if allowed, if allowed, whatever that means, and had no understanding of the Constitution or the concept of the rule of law. He discussed and confirmed. It's very strange when somebody says, "Oh, he has no understanding of the Constitution." Well, who's Kelly to say that? Is Kelly a constitutional lawyer? I mean, is Kelly a judge? I mean, where do you get off saying somebody doesn't understand the Constitution? Whereas John Kelly, do understand the Constitution.
And what is the definition of a fascist?
Yes, well, he's going to come to that. So he discussed and confirmed previous reports that Mr. Trump had made admiring statements about Hitler, had expressed contempt for disabled veterans, and has characterized those who died on the battlefield of the United States as losers and suckers. Comments first reported in 2020 by The Atlantic. Now, remember, we talked about that, that was in the early days of
recycling it.
Exactly. But what was interesting, I think, from that story was that it was everything was anonymous. It was all sourced anonymous. Nobody went on the record to say, I heard him saying that. And then subsequently, this losers and suckers comment has been attributed to Kelly, but Kelly never said that he had actually heard Trump saying losers and suckers. He said somebody had told him that Trump had used the term losers and suckers. And indeed, notice also how the story changes, because back in the 2020 story, he was only referring to those who died in World War I. Those Americans who died in World War I were losers and suckers. At least, that may be an argument. Now it's sort of transmogrified into saying that he thinks all American veterans who died in wars are losers and suckers. So it's amazing how this suddenly has completely transformed this phrase. Anyway, in response to a question about whether he thought Mr. Trump was a fascist, Mr. Kelly first read aloud the definition of fascism that he had found online. Well, as long as it's online. Well, looking at the definition of fascism, it's a far-right, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy. You see, that's a baffling one about centralized autocracy, because it's, I mean, you can argue that Nazi Germany, a lot of people said that it wasn't terribly centralized. I mean, there were all sorts of competition among institutions, and so it was never, everyone just enacts these orders. Anyway, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. Now, you got this online, and you think, okay, where does Trump come into all of this? I mean, I've never heard him talking about whatever a natural social hierarchy is. I've never heard him talking about that. I don't know where the centralized autocracy. He never got his hands around the federal government. And again, the forcible suppression of opposition, and where's that? So, he gets this definition of fascism and says, oh yeah, Trump fits it. And you think, well, I don't get where does he fit? I think I moved. Hold on, okay, go back. So that's he says this, and then he goes on. Mr. Kelly said the definition accurately described Mr. Trump. Okay, so certainly in my experience, those are the kinds of things that he thinks would work better in terms of running America. But I always love it. It's like, well, anybody can say, well, if I were a dictator, I could do so many things, and it'll be great. I could do this and this and this. Yeah, but you're not a dictator, so there's no point in even thinking, oh, well, yeah, anybody who's a dictator says, well, I can do this, this, and this, but you're not a dictator, so you can't do this, this, and this.
Well, I mean, you can turn all of this on its head. I mean, there was kind of a dictatorship when Trump was president, but he wasn't the dictator.
No, exactly.
It was the executive branch that was a dictator. If you want to, I mean, the Kelly is using apparently from online.
That's right. Online definition.
Well, this is intellectual laziness. I mean, essentially, whoever wrote that is looking at Nazi Germany and working backwards.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
and so it's not helpful. It's not helpful at all. Okay,
Right.
it used as a slur. I
Right.
mean, that definition. I don't really like it. It raises too many questions.
Yeah. 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 That's
And
right.
so, I mean, again, Mr. Kelly made it to the top of the heap here, but he doesn't sound like a very sharp guy.
No, not at all. Not at all. So, I mean, I think it's generally true. Many of the people who make their way through the military get to the top. They're not that smart because listen, how do they get to the top? Well, they have to take orders. Somebody, have to carry out orders, and then they have to suck up to political leaders. They know exactly what's expected of them from the politicians. So I think the people who get to the top really are not the smartest or sharpest knives in the drawer. So then he says, certainly the former president is in the far right area. He's certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators, and has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist. But as you say, if you go back to the Trump years, first of all, he was subjected to constant congressional investigation. He was subjected to an impeachment. And he had his own Justice Department working against him through the Mueller investigation. So I don't know where is the dictatorial. I mean, his own government was working against him.
Well, I don't know what far right means. Again, this is just
Nice.
bandied about. I don't.
Nothing.
It depends on the context, the way people use it. He's certainly an authoritarian. Evidence, please.
Exactly.
Admires people who are dictator. Admires is his word.
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's right.
What Trump does is that he's saying, I'm transactional. I can talk to anyone.
Right.
That's
Right.
all.
That's right.
That's really all.
That's it.
So you're a dictator because you're willing to talk?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And when you say admires, what do you suppose? Let's say you meet the Chinese leaders. What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to spit on them. You're supposed to be rude to them. The Xi Jinping. You're supposed to treat them with contempt, lecture them about democracy and human rights. I mean, who does that? I mean, of course he doesn't do that. Of course he treats the leaders, particularly huge countries like China. You treat them with great respect, and whether he's a dictator, is not a dictator, it doesn't matter. He represents China, and you have to deal with the person who represents China. Because he admires people who are dictators, and the United States, throughout its, like a post-war history and even before, has worked very, very happily with all sorts of dictators. The whole idea that, we only work with Democrats, since when? I mean, you work with dictators, ever since 1945.
What about Uncle Joe?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. all sorts of regimes. I mean, Saudi Arabia, it's not exactly a democracy, close ally of the United States. So somehow that's overlooked.
I mean, you have a guy in charge there that signs off on people being beheaded. Okay.
Beheaded, and what was it that they did to Khashoggi? They dismembered his body.
God. And they recorded it.
Anyway, so this is again from the New York Times. They're summarizing what Kelly told them in these interviews. He said Trump wanted personal loyalty to outweigh loyalty to the Constitution. I don't know any president who doesn't expect his staff personal loyalty. I mean, if you're his chief of staff in his White House, he expects personal loyalty. I mean, you're my chief of staff. I don't need a lecture from you about the Constitution. I just want, basically you do what I want you to do. Mr. Kelly said that in the first few days of working for Mr. Trump as his chief of staff in the summer of 2017, he had to explain to the president that top government officials like himself had taken an oath to the Constitution and would place that oath over personal loyalty. This is so stupid as to be almost unbelievable. First of all, if you don't like, an order that your president gives you, you resign. If it really you find it's against your moral principles, you resign. You don't get into an argument and say, well, I'm adhering to the Constitution, you're not, so I'm just not going to carry out your orders, and I'm just going to carry on being your chief of staff. So the idea, well, I took an oath of oath to the Constitution over personal loyalty. Well, if you think it's unconstitutional, then you leave. You can say, well, I know the Constitution better than the president does. I mean, there is a hierarchy here. He is the elected leader. I mean, so, well, I don't care whether you're elected leader. I'm going to stick to the Constitution, just simply not do as I'm told.
Well, I mean, potato. What did he find so objectionable? I mean, is there examples of this?
Because exactly, that's a very good point. There's never any examples of what was it? Did he ask you to go and you kill somebody? I mean, what was it? You said, but he says, well, he had to explain to the president. Well, the president was baffled, as anybody would be baffled by, what does that mean that about the Constitution? I mean, are you my chief of staff or aren't you? I mean, are you working for me or you're not? I mean, or are you going to sit here and argue with me about which one of us is right in our interpretation of the Constitution, which isn't either of our jobs. I mean, that's the courts can decide whether something is in accord with the Constitution or it isn't. He doesn't get to decide, well, I know what the Constitution says, you don't. Mr. Kelly said Mr. Trump pressed him about that pledge and seemed to have no appreciation that top aides were supposed to put their pledge to the Constitution and by extension the rule of law above all else, because it's rubbish. And that's why, and I think Trump was obviously baffled by what the hell Kelly was on about.
Well, I mean, I've never heard of a chief of staff. Their primary mission is to be a constitutional lawyer.
That's it, exactly. Constitutional lawyer and a judge. I mean, not, as if he's giving interpretation to what the Constitution says, which isn't.
I mean, maybe Kelly thought that that's what he was supposed to do, but George and I know presidential history pretty well. What you do is you bring in somebody from the DOJ and say, "Does this fly?"
Right. Yeah, okay. That's right. And in fact, that's why
you don't go to the chief of staff for that.
You're exactly right. In fact, the White House has an Office of Legal Counsel precisely for that purpose, so that the president gets advice on what the law is, on what the Constitution is. But it's not up to the chief of staff to determine what is and what isn't in accord with the Constitution. That's why you have an Office of Legal Counsel. That's why you have a DOJ, that they can tell you whether it's in accord with the Constitution.
But we remember, and this is refreshing our memory, is that Kelly just didn't think Trump should be president.
No, exactly.
Like Kelly should be president. That's why we're having.
That's right. That's exactly, and I think that's true, as we'll see, for a lot of the generals. They just don't think Trump should be president. They clearly thought they should be president. Who is this guy, this New York real estate guy, this reality TV show star? To be president, he's supposed to just carry out orders. We give the orders, he carries them out, and they're the ones who just don't understand. Well, that's not kind of how it works. You win an election. You may not like Trump. He ran for office and he won. You didn't run for office. You didn't win anything. So you have, he's president, you're not. And they're the ones who just didn't understand that point. Anyway, as soon as someone in his orbit loses that loyalty, Mr. Kelly said, that person is then out of favor with Mr. Trump and, quote, your time is short. I don't know any president who wouldn't exactly do that. You think FDR would keep you on if you showed that you weren't loyal to him? Oh, yeah, that's fine. Carry on doing whatever you're doing. I don't expect you to be loyal to me.
Actually, since you bring up FDR, If you look at he was in office for 12 years, and the number of people that broke their health
Right.
being
Right.
wanting to be the most loyal to FDR. He was
Right.
worshipped by his
Right.
staff.
Right.
Okay? Being loyal to the president, you're in the executive branch. Well, that's kind of what you're doing.
That's what you're there for. Yeah, that's it. That's you're not really there to have philosophical discussions about what is and what isn't in accord with the Constitution.
And you can be fired at any time for any reason, for no reason.
For no reason, exactly. And you're there, you're serving at the pleasure of the president. You know, he doesn't want you, boom, you're gone. Mr. Trump, Mr. Kelly said, wrongly believed that the uniformed and retired senior generals he brought into work for him would be loyal to him above all else. Why did he wrongly believe that? I think that he somehow rightly would think if you're bringing in a staff people, that they're going to be loyal to me. I mean, that's the whole point. You know, you're chief of staff. That means you're chief of the staff in the White House, and they're supposed to carry out the orders of the president. If they don't like the president, then they go. But none of these people ever left. They just decided to sabotage Trump's policies. It's the sort of the Alexander Vindman syndrome. Well, we know better than the president. This is part of the interagency consensus, and we just won't carry out his instructions. Trump told him that, quote, Hitler did some good things. Mr. Kelly confirmed previous reports that on more than one occasion, Mr. Trump spoke positively of Hitler. He commented more than once that, you know, Hitler did some good things too, Mr. Kelly said, Mr. Trump told him. The strange thing is that if, you know, Trump is in his 70s, how come he's never said any of these things in public? I mean, at the time when he could have just said them and no one would have thought, you know, anything more about it. I mean, you know, the guy's an entertainer. He's a, he likes to be in the newspapers. Why has he never expressed his admiration for Hitler all these years?
So here we go. Quote, he commented more than once that, you know, Hitler did some good things too. Well, what were those things? Did you ask him?
Yeah, exactly. What were those good things?
Everybody, that is just going around and around. Hitler did some good. Well, what good things are you talking about?
Well, exactly. That's right. Mr. Kelly said that Mr. Trump had little appreciation for history. I think he's lacking in that, he said, but said that he would still try to explain to Mr. Trump why those comments about Hitler were problematic. Oh, do tell us. Why are they problematic? And then he says, first of all, you should never say that, Mr. Kelly said that he told Mr. Trump. But if you knew what Hitler was all about from the beginning to the end, everything he did was in support of his racist, fascist life, philosophy, so that nothing he did, you could argue, was good. It was certainly not done for the right reason. Now, you know, when you read this, let's say what Kelly's saying is true. You know, right away, I'm baffled. Why are they wasting time, the public's dime, on having a discussion about Hitler? I mean, there's nothing else to do. I mean, you know, no more urgent matters to attend to. I mean, you're all basically on the public payroll than discussing Hitler. Oh, you know, and Mr. Kelly said that would usually end the conversation, but Mr. Trump would occasionally bring it up again.
I mean, I'm trying to understand this conversation, and it's only one-sided. We don't have
exactly.
Was Trump thinking of the Autobahns, the Volkswagen?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's it.
This is just this is just a stick to beat. Okay.
I think so. I agree.
It's not helpful in any way.
Right.
Did this influence Trump's policy? Well, if it did, what policy?
Right.
I mean, it's just churning it around. Okay.
Right.
It's a cudgel. It's a cudgel.
That's right. Exactly. And then you bring this up, you know, just a few days before an election. So he hasn't said this. This was already 5-6 years ago. He didn't go public with any of this until right now, just before the election.
Yeah, but George, can you fathom a single voter that's going to be swayed by
No,
all.
no.
No.
And you can't.
This
Yeah,
is just, pigeon feed
right.
for Trump haters. That's all it is.
Exactly. That's right.
And
Exactly.
I say pigeon feed because it's just so thin. It's just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it's not going to change the opinion of one voter, except
Yes,
for these guys are all having a wet dream before the
that's right.
election.
You're absolutely right. Because first of all this had been said before. All the Trump fascist, all that has been said really starting from 2015. And so you're not adding anything new to it. And so therefore, yeah, who are the people who are lapping this up? Yeah, all the people who are already watching MSNBC, the people who would, of course, never in a million years dream of voting for Trump. Yeah, they're lapping it up. But everybody else, they've heard all this. So if it didn't make any difference in 2016, it didn't make any difference in 2020, it's not going to make a difference now. And that's what's so bizarre, that you were again running with this whole fascist when you've already tried this. I mean, there's nothing new in this. You've tried this so many times before.
And plus, I think the cat was let out of the bag when you think about it. He has to use an internet definition.
Yes.
So, Mr. Kelly, you don't really know what fascism is, right? You had to look it up.
Yeah, exactly. You have to look it up. Yes, that's it. Well, that's the online definition.
When did you look it up? During a conversation with the president, after a conversation? Right. See, if you have to, he said something very strange. Maybe I should find out what he's trying to say. And
right.
then you put this on the back end.
Right.
I mean, so Kelly doesn't really know much about history, apparently.
No,
but he had to look up the definition.
That's right. Exactly. Then he said Trump called service members who were injured or killed losers and suckers, despite denials from Trump and some aides. So again, the story is changing. It started with this, the American veterans who died in World War I, and now it's sort of, service members who were injured or killed were losers and suckers. Confirming a statement he gave to CNN last year, Mr. Kelly said that on multiple occasions, Mr. Trump told him that those Americans wounded, captured, or killed in action were losers and suckers. And again, you never said that. That, going back to that story by Jeffrey Goldberg in 2020, it was very narrow in the reference. Now you're saying Americans wounded and captured were losers and suckers. So it's,
maybe this is just an outlier. Maybe I'm giving too much of the benefit of the doubt. But, maybe on some level for Trump, he thinks war is such a waste.
Yes.
Okay.
I think so too.
I think it comes from there. Okay. Yeah. Because if we look at the totality of what he says,
right.
He's never really that specific. Of course, he doesn't know history very well. It's obvious, okay? Does Kamala Harris?
Right.
Did George W. Bush?
No, exactly. I mean, Trump has been doing
Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Right. No, I think that's right. I mean, Trump has been doing whatever he's been doing most of his life. I mean, he's been, real estate, trying to get into the newspapers, he was in trying to run casinos in Atlantic City. Reality TV shows. That's what he does. He's been, he was a kind of a businessman, an entrepreneur. He wasn't interested in history. So he doesn't know any history. Why would he? I mean, that's just, he was somebody who was constantly thinking about the future, how he can become richer and more famous than he is now.
I've been to some of the cemeteries in France, the World War I cemetery, and they're very beautiful and very moving. But it's such a waste,
right?
Waste of a generation. Okay,
that's right.
You have such a mixture of emotions because there's a feeling of reverence, okay, and of quietude and legacy, and then there's that anger inside of you. He was only 18 years old. Look at Tombstone.
Yeah,
what a waste this was.
That's right. No, that's exactly right, and particularly when it came to World War I, there was no good reason for the United States to get involved in World War I. It wasn't very popular. to get involved in it. I mean, Woodrow Wilson kind of manipulated the public into getting America involved in that. It turned into a complete fiasco. America got nothing at all out of that war. So it's perfectly understandable. Somebody comes along and says, well, all these lives have been lost. For what? It's like 18-year-olds. They're dead. Died for what? What was the point of it? So there's nothing wrong with saying, I mean, losers and suckers kind of blaming them, but the people you should blame are the sort of political leaders who just got themselves into this slaughter. But there was no need for it. In the case of the United States, there was absolutely no need for this.
It's really quite interesting because Americans are woefully undereducated, badly educated when it comes to history. But you may have some people that understand the Second World War because of Saving Private Ryan and
Right.
the brothers and stuff like that. But even a college graduate is that, what was at stake in the First World War? They'd be hard pressed.
They're very hard pressed
because it is. It's still academics debate it, and you end up, if you say it was a waste, you're in, they put you in East Berlin. Okay, right. Those are very strong arguments that the United States never should have intervened in that war.
No, of course,
actually, we can go much further. Britain shouldn't have gotten involved.
No, absolutely. It was a ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous war. And again, because we only have one side of it, we don't really know what exactly was said, if anything was said at all. What was said? You're taking it out of context, and and Trump, he doesn't really know much history, but Trump has very good instincts. He's very good instinctively, even if he doesn't articulate things in the best possible way. He's not a especially articulate person, but he's very good instinctively, and he may well have just instinctively said this was an absolutely terrible war. There was no reason whatsoever for the United States to get involved, and the United States didn't get anything at all out of it. So yeah, it was a waste.
Actually, what you could make a very strong argument, I would, and I'm sure George would too, is it forestalled the end of the British Empire.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And then that the time in Paris was not the only time that he ever said it. So again, Kelly's now, expanding on this. Mr. Kelly said, referring to reports that Mr. Trump told him that he did not want to visit a cemetery where American service members killed during World War I were buried. Whenever John McCain's name came up, he'd go through this rant about him being a loser and all those people were suckers. And why do you people think that people getting killed are heroes? And he'd go through this rant. To me, I could never understand why he was that way. He may be the only American citizen that feels that way about those who gave their lives or served their country. Now, the problem with this is it's so inconsistent with everything we know about Trump. I mean, Trump treats the military reverentially. He loves the military. He's always in awe of these generals.
The military parade in Washington?
Yeah, exactly. There was the military parade. He loves going to Arlington National Cemetery. And, even when I remember when he hired James Mattis as defense secretary, he thought, oh, Mad Dog Mattis. Mad Dog Mattis. He loves the idea of, raising Cain. He loves the idea that military people are tough guys. Everything about him is that he has, I think, an unhealthy reverence for military people. So it's like all the other things people say about Trump. We have to think negatively about him, but it goes against everything else we know about him. Like, he has, with that porn star, Stormy Daniels. You think, yeah, but he's a germaphobe. I mean, why would he hang around with porn stars? Everything, or why would he engage in sleazy doings in a Moscow hotel room with prostitutes when he's a germaphobe? But people want to believe bad things about him. So yeah, that's what he did.
Yeah. But I mean, again, let's look at the context of the center paragraph here. It's John McCain.
John McCain.
There was no love lost between
them. No, there's no love lost.
Okay. So I think that, the real problem Trump had was not with the military or with heroes. It was with John McCain.
Right.
Right. And John McCain made Trump's life a nightmare. Okay,
We're going to come to John McCain when we come to
very personal.
Very, very personal. We'll come to that because he featured a lot in Jeffrey Goldberg's article. And then, so this is a letter, the other day there was a letter written by, I think, 13 members of Trump's staff endorsing Kelly. And it says, the revelations generally Kelly brought forward are disturbing and shocking, but because we know Trump and have worked for and alongside him, we were sadly not surprised by what General Kelly had to say. This is who Donald Trump is. Donald Trump's disdain for the American military and admiration for dictators like Hitler is rooted in his desire for absolute unchecked power. Just ranting away desire, but absolute.
I know. This is, what the image just pops into my head when you read it. This is a drinking game.
Yes.
Okay. We're done. Dictator, drink. Okay. Myers, drink. This is a drinking game.
That's right. Absolute unchecked. He wants absolute unchecked power. This is a man who threw his own vice president, Mike Pence, at a violent mob in a desperate bid to hold on to power. I must have missed that. I don't remember Mike Pence being thrown onto a violent mob. When Donald Trump says he wants to be a dictator on day one and deploy the military against American citizens he deems the enemy from within, he means it. And then when you look at, I think,
go to the
next. When you look at these signatures, these are all.
But the point I wanted to make with the last slide, and now we have this slide. These are the enemies.
Right.
These are the enemies.
Right.
And they show themselves to us.
That's right. Right. No, that's right. These are all very junior staff members who, basically used their time under Trump to parlay that into successful careers in the media. Elisa Farah Griffin, who kind of resigned in the last 2 weeks of the administration, and because she's rather attractive, got herself a nice gig at CNN, and then she's on The View, all those women talking. Stephanie Grisham, same thing. She was just a terrible. I think she was supposed to be press secretary, but never really gave any press conferences. And then Anthony Scaramucci. Remember Scaramucci?
Oh, God. He was that guy was a train wreck. Ooh.
He was a train wreck. I think he lasted about a week in that job.
Well, I think less than a week.
Less than a week. Yeah, I think it was about 2 days.
It was like a couple of days, man.
A couple of days. He said, I think someone threatened the reporter. I'm going to stab you in the chest, or something completely ridiculous. And yet again, he's managed to parlay this abysmal, this 2-day performance into a rather lucrative career. Oh, let's see what Scaramucci has to say about Trump. Miles Taylor, he was the guy who wrote that anonymous article in the New York Times. You remember he said, I represent a powerful force within the administration working to destroy the Trump presidency. And it turns out to be he's a kind of a very low-level staffer.
And it's his name that was attached to it. If you read that document carefully, more than one person wrote it because the writing styles change.
Right. Yeah. And then Olivia Troyer, she's another one she worked for Pence and has used her hatred of Trump to have a successful media career. I mean, that's what you do. You work and then you get gigs on the media. They're all trying to get to be regular commentators on MSNBC and CNN. There's a lot of money in that. But not all of them are as cute as Elisa Farah Griffin. She managed to pull that off. They can't all pull it off. Anyway, here's a different article from the New York Times. Amid talk of fascism, Trump's threats and language evoke a grim past. This is always this ominous tone in the New York Times. Grim past. Plenty of presidents have been called dictators by their political opponents, but none until now has been publicly accused of being fascist by his own hand-picked advisors. I think you're right. I think this may be the October surprise, the Trump Hitler
Well,
connection.
it comes with a thud.
Yes, it
Okay.
is a thought. I agree.
No, because I mean, this is just
Yeah,
desperation. Look, anyone, George and I really love history, particularly modern history. And this is why it's so exasperating for
right,
me, is that, you know, the Nazi dictatorship, Mussolini's dictatorship, they're very complicated, they're very nuanced, and we get these broad brushes. We don't
right,
want anything like that ever to happen again.
right.
But when you trivialize all of this, they're trivializing one of the darkest moments in modern history. They're trivializing it by associating it with Donald Trump. It's
Right.
absurd. It's
Well,
absurd.
that's right, and that's really the problem is that nobody really knows very much history these days. The only thing they ever learn now is Hitler and the Holocaust, but they don't even learn anything very much. So that's their only point of reference. Everything is always somehow about Hitler. Whatever it is, it's somehow about Hitler. And like you think, isn't there any other history, the historical period, any other historical figures that you've studied that you can talk about? No, no, no. It's just Hitler, and that's why this is the thing. Oh, he's got fascist. They can't even bring up anything else. So while presidents have pushed the boundaries of power and in some cases abused it outright, no American commander in chief over the past couple of centuries has so aggressively sought to discredit the institutions of democracy at home while so openly embracing and envying dictators abroad.
Okay, stop. Aggressively sought to discredit. That is a real wild,
It's wild. It is wild because you can't,
unsubstantiated claim.
yeah. And again,
Okay, I mean, explain to me. So aggressively sought to discredit the institutions of democracy. Well, if Trump doesn't know anything about anything, how can he be doing this? I mean, you're assuming that he
right,
has a genius mind,
right,
okay?
right.
But you can't have Keystone Cops and 007 at the same time. You have
Well,
to make
exactly. I think you're absolutely right, and that's why apropos of that, you have at the same time, the same newspaper on the same page, stories about, oh, Trump wants to institute a fascist dictatorship. He's a Hitlerian. And next to it are stories about, oh, Trump is really looking his age. He's very old. He seems very old and decrepit. He's slurring his words and he doesn't really know. Boy, he looks as if he's really past it. Well, which is it? I mean, either he's going to institute this fascist dictatorship, which will require a lot of energy and dedication, or is he just sort of an old doddering person who's really unable to keep up with the pace of the campaign? They don't know. They just it's like you're throwing up balls in the air and hope you're gonna catch them.
That's it. That's it.
Um, And so, although plenty of presidents have been called dictators by their opponents, none has been publicly accused of fascism by his own hand-picked top advisor, who spent the day after day with him at the Oval Office. Mr. Trump does not use the word to describe himself. In fact, he uses it to describe his adversaries, but he does not shrink from the impression it leaves. He goes out of his way to portray himself as an American strongman, vowing, if re-elected, to use the military to crack down on dissent. No, he didn't do that. That's, again, typical New York Times. To use the Justice Department to prosecute and imprison his foes, kind of what was done to him. To shut down news media outlets that displease him. How do you shut down a media outlet? I don't know. I mean, what is the mechanism why a president can shut down CNN? And again,
Yeah, or so Joe Biden, using the organs of the state infiltrating social
yeah,
media.
exactly.
But do
Yeah,
you think these companies are going to listen to Trump? No.
yeah, that's right. Exactly. This after you're right. I mean, exactly what the Biden administration did, trying to coerce the social media companies. And then to claim authority that his predecessor did not have, and round up millions of people living in the country illegally and put them in camps or deport them en masse. Well, he can't do that. I mean, again, look, first of all, if you're living illegally, then you are obviously eligible for deportation. That's one thing. But again, there are courts. You're going to have to go through the courts. You can't just simply, well, I'm going to round them up. No, the courts are obviously going to
challenge. You think Gavin Newsom is going to take
right.
Here Donald Trump? No, of course.
Right.
This is just way over the top.
This is complete, amazing, just hysteria. This is New York Times. He was not really a fascist in his first term, his defenders maintain, and therefore should not be expected to be one in the second. All the talk of fascism, they argue, is just hysterical, hyperbolic, or opportunistic defamation by the political left, which routinely seeks to tag any conservative with that label to discredit them and their ideas. And it's true. I mean, they said all that about George.
What a nice perfunctory paragraph.
Exactly. They always put that in, yeah, that's right. It's like they say all this, like, the Russian government denies these allegations. You put, oh, well, that's it. You've done your journalistic due diligence. If anything, Mr. Trump and his allies tried to turn the argument around on the Democrats, arguing that Mr. Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris pose the real threat to democracy because a special counsel appointed by their administration indicted the former president, which they likened to Victor's justice more commonly seen in countries with less developed systems. Well, that's true, isn't it? I mean, he's been indicted on things that no other president had ever been indicted on. Criminal charges have been pressed against him that had never been pressed against any other president.
All of the paragraphs against the preceding slide in this one, I have no objection.
No, exactly. But that's because, he's going to now reject all this. Mr. Trump calls Ms. Harris both a fascist and a communist without seeming to realize they were historical and ideological enemies of one another. Now, this is very strange. I mean, this is the New York Times and all, who've been saying that Trump is indeed an admirer of Hitler and Stalin. There's an article, again, in The Atlantic, by Anne Applebaum, saying, Trump is, following the model of Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini, all three. It's a shame they couldn't put somebody else in. Then, I don't know. I guess Franco probably isn't really very well known, but funny you could put.
I think someone pointed out to me, Pol Pot made it into the print. It just didn't make it in the headline.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they say, oh, he doesn't realize fascism. They were strong ideological enemies in one way. Yeah, but you say the same thing about Trump.
Yeah, well, I mean, without seeming to realize. The New York Times doesn't seem to realize that it is applying a label ahistorically on Donald Trump. Right. They don't seem to realize.
No, of course not. Exactly. That's exactly right. And then Mr. Kelly is not the only person who worked for Mr. Trump who worries about his autocratic instincts. General Mark Milley, the retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who was appointed by Mr. Trump, was quoted in Bob Woodward's new book, calling Mr. Trump fascist to the core. I like fascist to the core. So in recent days, 13 other former Trump aides, we looked at that, released a letter backing Mr. Kelly's assessment and warning of the former president's desire for absolute.
Well, Magnificent Milley acquitted himself very, very badly. History is going to be very unkind to him. And so he's just kind of sealed his fate. Okay?
He has sealed it, yeah. No, you're
was grossly incompetent.
That's exactly,
and violated, at least my understanding, the Constitution.
He did, and we're going to come to that because they never really mentioned, the issue with Milley and why Trump took such umbrage over what Milley did, which was that Milley, behind Trump's back, started communicating with the Chinese generals as if Milley, spoke on behalf of the United States, and therefore he put the United States in peril. Others who have broken with Mr. Trump see it differently. John Bolton, his former national security advisor, said that fascism is a comprehensive ideology and Trump isn't capable of philosophical thought.
That's so John Bolton. Okay.
But he is dangerous nonetheless, Mr. Bolton said. A second Trump term will increase the damage he did in his first term, some of it perhaps irreparable, but not because he's thought about it systematically. I love it. Bolton was the one who was constantly trying to get America into a war, wanted America to bomb Iran because the Iranians shot down a drone. And
he wanted the Libyan model for North Korea.
He wanted the Libyan model, and Bolton is quoted as if, well, Bolton is warning about the dangers posed by Trump. Either way, advisors like Mr. Kelly, Mr. Bolton, and General Milley restrained Mr. Trump in his first name. Bolton kind of restrained him, talking him out of actions they considered unwise or illegal. Now, again, remember
Bolton got fired. Okay.
Bolton got fired, but remember, again, now during that first term, the New York Times and all the rest were urging Trump to embark on a very anti-Russian course. Really, he wasn't sufficiently Russophobic. He wasn't doing sufficiently to fight back against Russia. So that was the gravamen of their charges against Trump. Particularly after the Helsinki summit. Oh, this is too friendly to Putin. So now they say, oh, we have to talk him out of actions they considered unwise or illegal. Was Russiagate, was that wise and legal, making that whole stuff up?
Well, I don't know. Talking him out of actions they considered unwise. Or again, can we have some examples?
Examples, yeah.
Like he said, it looks like Trump drew a line in the sand and said, "No, we're not doing that. We're not going to."
That's right.
Have regime change in Damascus, for example.
Right. Exactly.
Go to war with Iran. I mean, so
that's right. That's right. But that's why there's such a deviousness of the New York Times, because they want to suggest, well, Trump is really very, very dangerous. But their real objection to Trump is precisely that he wasn't belligerent enough, that he wasn't keen enough on fighting wars. Remember, the whole point of the Ukraine Gate impeachment was that Trump was holding up military aid for Ukraine. That was their objection. That somehow, Trump wasn't reckless enough, and that, it's outrageous that Trump should hold up sending arms to Ukraine. None of them will be around for a second term, as Mr. Trump has learned to avoid more establishment figures who will resist his more extreme demands. Again, his extreme demands are precisely not to go to war. Instead, he has surrounded himself of late with more radical advisors who encourage Mr. Trump's most anti-democratic instinct. Again, as you say, what examples here? And then he says, whether intentionally or not, Mr. Trump has fueled concerns about fascism since the day he first descended the golden elevator Trump Tower to announce his presidential bid in 2015. And then he demonized Mexican migrants as rapists. He didn't. And within months, he vowed to ban all Muslims from entering the country.
Trump has fueled concerns about that. Well, who's concerned here?
Who is concerned? Exactly.
It's all the same people.
That's right. But notice that then it says he fashioned a foreign policy around the themes of isolationism and nationalism. So in other words, he wasn't dangerous and reckless. Isolationism and nationalism means we're going to pursue our own national interests. We're not going to get involved in a lot of stupid wars around the world. So again, it's this very slippery, devious language in which people.
Okay, so we got two paragraphs in front of us. Okay, fueled concerns about fascism, and then in the second, he's fashioned a foreign policy around themes of isolationism and national. Is that fascism?
Exactly. Is isolationism fascism? Yeah, that's right. You say they always say this, because they want to say, let's say we talked about before about Charles Lindbergh. Oh, Charles Lindbergh, yeah, the fascist. But Lindbergh was, well, basically, he said, we don't want to get into any wars.
Lindbergh
He
was
wasn't
not a
isolation. He says,
fascist.
no wars. America doesn't want to get into any wars.
Lindbergh was not a
Of
fascist.
course he wasn't. But in the New York Times, that's how they presented it. Somehow he was a fascist. You're absolutely right. He wasn't a fascist. When told by the New York Times reporters that it sounded as if he was talking about an America First approach, he happily appropriated the term. The fact that it was a term discredited by history because of its association with World War II with isolationists, including some Nazi sympathizers, did not matter to him. Well, it didn't matter because America First movement was simply America First. We don't want to get involved in other people's wars. That was the whole point. That was the theme of America First, of Lindbergh, is no return to what happened in World War I when we get involved in other people's conflicts that have nothing to do with us. He says, oh, he's discredited. Well, discredited by whom? Discredited, maybe in the New York Times, but it's not discredited.
Well, it's media outlets like this that make isolationism a dirty word. Okay, right. You're applying a meaning. Okay, right, which is not necessarily historically correct.
Right. Exactly. And then, nor did he mind citing fascists like Mussolini. When Trump retweeted a quote that it is better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep, NBC's Chuck Todd told him that he was from Mussolini. So you brought up Mussolini. He said he didn't even know it was from Mussolini.
Hey, so Trump doesn't know much about history. So how can he be a fascist if he doesn't know history?
Right. I know who said it, Mr. Trump replied, but what difference does it make whether it's Mussolini or somebody else? Well, yeah, okay. What's wrong with that logic? I don't care. I agree with it. That's all he's saying here. He also came to use language familiar to victims of Joseph Stalin when he declared journalists who angered him to be enemies of the people, a phrase used to send Russians to the gulag. Enemies of the people, that it has a longer pedigree than that. It has a longer pedigree than Stalin. But notice, first of all, they said, well, Stalin, Trump doesn't realize that fascism and communism were opposed to each other. Now you're saying, oh, he's Mussolini, he's Stalin, he's Hitler. Now you're saying, so apparently, but it's okay to say that that Trump is Mussolini and Stalin, having first lectured Trump, not sufficiently understanding that fascism and communism are very, very different.
Well, this is an exercise of Trump is historically illiterate. I'm perfectly willing to accept that, but so is the New York Times.
Exactly. That's exactly
arguing the illiterate.
That's right. He's exactly right. And then Mr. Trump has long expressed interest in the most notorious dictator of the past century, Adolf Hitler, whose Nazis also used that phrase. And then says, in a 1990 interview, so 1990, so that's 34 years ago, they dig up in the 1990 interview, Mr. Trump said he had a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf, although his first wife, Ivana, and the friend who gave him the book said it was actually My New Order, a collection of speeches. So this is so stupid. First of all, many people who have many books have Mein Kampf among their books. I also have a copy of Mein Kampf. Does that mean that you're an admirer and an exponent of Hitler's ideas? So it's just that I have a copy of Mein Kampf. He said this in an interview 34 years ago. Then it turns out he wasn't even sure, that he was maybe talking about something else. A collection of Hitler's speeches. I don't know, one or the other. But so this is the case. This is the case that the New York Times is making against Trump. He said something in an interview in 1990, but we don't even know whether he was actually referring to this book of Hitler's or another book of Hitler's. And this is Jeffrey Goldberg. And then the headline is, Trump, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had. The Republican nominee's preoccupation with dictators and his disdain for the American military is deepening.
You know what, the thought that crosses my mind, George, let's just go from, I don't want to use Harry Truman because Harry Truman was a bookworm. He liked to read. Okay. Well, General Eisenhower, he was a general. But I mean, it would be interesting to know how much do presidents actually know about history?
Not much, not very much.
I
I mean,
think
there's some, I think some people, are well read. I think Nixon was a very well read. He spent a lot of time reading. Most presidents aren't like that. I mean, they make out as if they read a great deal, but obviously they don't. Obama likes to pretend that he reads a great deal, but he obviously doesn't. He has staff people telling him, what books should I recommend? And they tell him, these are the books you should recommend. And so, oh yeah, these are the books that Obama has been reading. Bill Clinton was the same. Then that's not what they're into. I mean, a lot of these people are into power. Yep.
Well, Jeffrey Goldberg does know a lot about history, and he wants to make sure his version
Yeah,
of
yeah,
it
yeah. I
is one that's propagated. See,
Yeah.
this is the deviousness of Jeffrey Goldberg.
Yeah. I agree.
He knows the history of post-war Middle East very, very well. He was a participant in
He was a participant. He served in the IDF. He was in the IDF, and oversaw the imprisonment of Palestinians. And then he kind of made his way through American journalism. And of course, his most famous contribution to American journalism was laying the groundwork for the Iraq invasion by putting out those ridiculous and discredited stories about the links between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda, and so to justify the American invasion. And that was very, very important because the Americans were actually talking about weapons of mass destruction, but Goldberg, made the crucial link between 9/11 and Saddam Hussein. Because even if you talk about weapons of mass destruction, you still have to somehow link Saddam to 9/11. And Goldberg did that by presenting this fake, phony story about Al-Qaeda's links to Saddam Hussein. And then, so he goes on, the personal qualities displayed by Trump. So he starts off with this whole story about this woman who was killed in horrible at Fort Hood. She was bludgeoned, a soldier. She was a private. She was bludgeoned to death by another private, and Trump had her in the White House, and he promised to pay for the funeral. And then allegedly, by Goldberg alleges that Trump didn't pay for the funeral because they presented a bill of $60,000, and then Trump said, "I'm not paying that," and so on. So that's the opening of Goldberg's very long story, just to show us what a horrible person Trump was. But the irony of this is that the family is not attacking Trump. On the contrary, the sister of the young woman who was bludgeoned to death said, "Oh no, I voted for Trump. Trump has been nothing but kind to me." I mean, I can show the tweet. There's the tweet. Myra Julienne, wow, I don't appreciate how you, that's Goldberg, the Atlantic, how you are exploiting my sister's death for politics, hurtful and disrespectful to the important changes she made for service members. President Donald Trump did nothing but show respect for my family and Vanessa. In fact, I voted for President Trump today. So she didn't think much of Goldberg. And then Goldberg said, yeah, but they still haven't denied the story that he didn't pay the $60,000 for the funeral. I mean, we don't know, what he paid or what he didn't pay. But nonetheless, you can see the family does not hold anything against Trump. Anyway, he says here that Trump has frequently voiced his disdain for those who serve in the military and for their devotion to duty, honor, and sacrifice. Former generals who have worked for Mr. Trump say that the sole military virtue he prizes is obedience. As his presidency drew to a close, and in the years since, he has become more and more interested in the advantages of dictatorship and the absolute control of the military that he believes it would deliver. And then, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had, Trump said in a private conversation in the White House, according to two people who heard him say this, anonymous, of course. People who were totally loyal to him, that follow orders. This is absolutely false, and then so on. Now, the point is that, when you bring up, Hitler and his generals, many scholars, not pro-Hitler, would say Hitler's generals were brilliant. I mean, one after another, they were brilliant generals, whether it's von Rundstedt or Rommel or Model, Kesselring, Guderian, they were brilliant generals. You don't have to admire Hitler to say these people were brilliant in their military strategy. So when you say, oh, I wish I had generals like Hitler had, you can say, okay, well, you may just admire their military prowess.
Well, I mean, they were good generals in spite of Hitler. Okay.
In spite of Hitler, exactly. There was, the Wehrmacht was a formidable military machine, as was the Imperial German army. They had brilliant generals there, which is why Germany was so difficult to defeat in both wars.
George, we've been through a lot of slides here.
Yes.
I don't see the evidence.
No, exactly. Where's the
waiting
evidence?
for the evidence.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. My impression, and I'm extremely prejudiced against Goldberg. Okay.
Yes.
But I think this is made up. I think it's.
I agree. That's a very good point. Exactly. Where you keep saying this, fascist, but where's the evidence? And then here we have a desire to force U.S. military leaders to be obedient to him and not the Constitution is one of the constant themes of Trump's military-related discourse. So we had that similar, to the New York Times. And then, his denigration of military service, his ignorance of the provisions of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, his admiration for brutality and anti-democratic norms of behavior, and just pile on. And then here he gets on to Trump disparagement of the military, and in particular, his obsessive criticism of the war record of the late Senator John McCain. Should have profoundly alienated Republican voters, but he didn't, if not Americans generally. And in part, my interest grew from the absolute novelty of Trump's thinking. This country had never been, to the best of my knowledge, had never seen, to the best of my knowledge, a national political figure who insulted veterans, wounded warriors, and the fallen with metronomic regularity. Now, the case with McCain, if you remember 2015, McCain took a very strong objection to Trump. Trump, the essence of Trump, he's a counterpuncher. He doesn't really initiate things, but when anyone attacks him, he hits back very hard. And it was McCain who began that, and then Trump, escalated that. And then McCain famously said, well, in my memorial service, Trump is not to attend. So everybody was invited to attend John McCain's memorial service.
John, all these articles tell us, that we should pay homage and have reverence for the military. I don't.
No, I don't. I really don't.
And John McCain is one of the worst of all of them.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
These people are really barking up the wrong tree, because a lot of people will say, a lot of veterans will say, why did I lose my mind after sitting in Iraq for two months services? Why did I lose my leg? Why did you, look at all these people that made money off of it. And then when they left Afghanistan, they left $80 billion worth or something like that behind. These are the people. This is what this media props up. They prop up bad people. Okay,
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Because the one thing we used to always think about, veterans of wars, is that then they spend the rest of their lives advocating against war. They're saying, no, I've seen war. I've seen what it does to my friends and comrades. I don't want that again. And that's what it used to be. You always had these World War II veterans, when they were still around and active in politics, who say, no, absolutely not. We want to avoid war at all costs. McCain was really the first of the veterans who was constantly advocating for war, which is very, very strange. I mean, that, he was injured in the war and so on. So why is he advocating for it? Why is he always eager to bomb some country, to invade some country, knowing all of the killing that will result? So he was the worst person.
Well, what they're doing, this George and I chronicle revisionism, is they're completely revising how Americans have thought about the military. George is absolutely right. My father fought in the Second World War, and when they got together, you know, they said nothing good about it.
No,
Okay,
exactly.
interrupted their lives, their friends were
Right.
killed. Okay, they saw things that they can't unsee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what we have here is that we have the Atlantic. We have John McCain on a pedestal glorifying war.
That's right.
That's not part of the American tradition.
No, exactly. And then he talks about this in their book, The Divider, Trump in the White House, and the Peter Baker. He's a New York Times guy who we
These
just
people
quoted.
are they're such mouthpieces for empire.
That's right. And the quote, "Why can't you be like the German generals?" Trump at various points had grown frustrated with military officials he deemed disloyal and disobedient. And then, according to Baker and Glasser, Kelly explained to Trump the German generals tried to kill Hitler 3 times and almost pulled it off. This correction did not move Trump to reconsider his views. No. They were totally loyal to him, the president responded. But the funny thing here is Trump is actually correct. Most of the German generals stuck by Hitler to the end. There were some who were involved in the coup, Rommel famously, but the rest, all those people, the von Rundstedt and Guderian, and the rest of them, they stuck by it to the end.
Look, again, you have two things that can exist at the same time. During the Second World War, Germany had some brilliant generals, really. But, you know, when the Red Army was on the Vistula and they were on the Rhine, okay, these generals, the vast majority of them stuck behind them, okay? They did, okay? So what kind of military minds are there? I mean, German military tradition, you stay with the commander-in-chief.
Stay with the commander.
Okay?
Yeah.
But
that's right. And that's
one of the problems is that so many of these people in this conversation, there's too much illiteracy going on. Yes. Donald Trump saw The Longest Day, the film, okay? Good film. I liked it.
It's got a good film. And the parts with the German generals, I think von Rundstedt appears in that, was good. I mean, that way, again, there was still... In those days, you could still make films and express admiration for the German generals without actually admiring the Hitler cause, but you admire the German general staff.
Paris Burning. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You know, the occupying German general of Paris, he refused to blow up the city. Okay. He wasn't loyal.
Right. No, that's right. But
the problem is that there's a narrative that they want to push on us, okay? Yeah. And at the same time, it's all cluttered with popular culture, okay?
Right. No, that's right. But what's important to just remember, they want to say, oh, the German generals, but Kelly is actually wrong here, because there were, the Stauffenberg plot. Stauffenberg was a colonel. Stauffenberg did want generals to join, and the generals said no, they didn't want to join because they thought ultimately Germany is going to lose this war, and we will get blamed for it, and and then the German people will hate us for centuries for having undermined it. So their view was, we're generals, we're supposed to serve our country, we have to do what we're supposed to do, which is to remain loyal and do whatever we can to fight for our country. That was their view. So it's just simply, historically wrong. Now we can argue about all this, about the Stauffenberg plot and the rest, but Trump is not wrong, and therefore, the way that Goldberg presents it as if, oh, what an absurd thing to say. Well, he's not wrong. As oh no, they were totally loyal to him.
Well, I mean, this also brings up the question here. So apparently Trump is obsessed with loyalty. Apparently he's obsessed with some kind of German efficiency, which can be easily argued in many different directions, as you well know, George, right. Okay? But that has nothing to do with fascism.
It's nothing, exactly. That's why you're absolutely right. because the whole issue of the German military is a separate issue from fascism. I mean, there are people who are going to condemn the German generals for having served Hitler, but they didn't really say that they were actually were believers in Nazism. They just simply were professional soldiers.
And people that know the literature, it's very interesting. It happens very often. If we look at Guderian, for example, he was a Nazi, okay? But very often when you look at these, Paulus, for example, he wasn't.
From Paulus, no, it
Often
was not.
historians will say General X, a ardent Nazi party member. They often have to do that because it's not clear cut. It's
No,
not. There were categories of those that were sympathizers. Others were Russian aristocracy. This is, we serve the state. It's not uniform. Okay,
No,
that's why often generals are described to what degree they were sympathetic to the regime ideology.
But but by and large, they were not. They were basically military people, military professional. And the evidence for that is that they, at Nuremberg, they did want to think, well, should we put these people on trial? And by and large, it didn't happen. Again, the German generals that we mentioned, most of them, nothing really happened afterwards. They were allowed to retire and write their memoirs. That's kind of how they're distorting this history. Anyway, he says here, this week I asked Kelly about their exchange. He told me that when Trump raised the subject of German generals, Kelly responded by asking, do you mean Bismarck's generals? Bismarck's generals? Why would Bismarck? Bismarck didn't really spend too much time. I mean, there was the Franco-Prussian War, but he went on for another 20 years. He didn't fight too many wars after the Franco-Prussian War. So Bismarck generals, he went on. I mean, I knew he didn't know who Bismarck was or about the Franco-Prussian War. I said, do you mean the Kaiser's generals? Surely you can't mean Hitler's generals.
Bullshit. I don't believe this. This is
I don't believe it either.
Completely fabricated. Nobody thinks this way. Nobody.
Exactly. And again,
he's just teasing you.
Like, I agree.
And I'm so smart. No, this is a complete fraud.
That's right. I couldn't agree more. Anyway, he goes on. Kelly, retired Marine general and some blah blah, and said in an interview for the CNN reporters Jim Sciutto's book, The Return of Great Powers, that Trump praised aspects of Hitler's leadership. He said, well, but Hitler did some good things, Kelly recalled. I said, well, what? And he said, well, Hitler rebuilt the economy. But what did he do with that rebuilt economy? He turned it against his own people and against the world, Kelly admonished Trump. I said, sir, you can never say anything good about the guy. Nothing. Now, again, it's sort of, Kelly is sort of now, this is his thing. Oh, he said this and this about Hitler. But the strange thing is that, well, where's all of the evidence? Trump is now in his late 70s. Where's the evidence that he has ever expounded anything about Hitler? I mean, Kelly seems to present it as if Trump is really very preoccupied with Hitler. Well, when did that happen? I mean, all those years when he was constantly on CNN and in the New York Post, he never seemed to say anything about Hitler. Now he's talking about Hitler all the time. And as well, Hitler rebuilt the economy. I thought he was going to make the crack about, he made the trains run on time. It's like, well, when
that was applied. That comes from Mussolini.
It is Mussolini because the Germans the trains always ran on time.
Always ran on time.
Yeah, that's but some people who are not so familiar with it would say, Hitler made the trains run on time. But you're right, it was Mussolini that was saying it. And then he goes on. This wasn't the only time Kelly felt compelled, and then he talks again about this whole thing in the.
Well, I mean, again, one of the things that we have to kind of compare. Did he talk about Mao? Did he talk about Stalin? Did he talk about FDR? Did he talk about Lincoln? I mean, where in the hierarchy? On some news on websites they have like the most popular story. It's like economy. Right. Okay. Right. I mean, so could we, I don't know what you call that.
right.
Where's Hitler in
That's
all of
right.
this?
That's right. Well, that's the interesting thing. He keeps saying about Hitler, but you don't have Trump quoting like what was it? Was there a particular general, Hitler's general, that you really admire? Was it, say, I don't know, Guderian? You thought, well, boy, the way he kind of reinvented panzer warfare, that's what I admire. I mean, it's like he's saying this, which is it's so generic. That's why
Well, I
it
mean,
doesn't sound plausible.
Trump got into it again. General Robert E. Lee,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
brilliant general,
Yes,
a brilliant general.
yes, yeah. Of course it was.
It's probably the greatest American general ever.
Right.
Okay. Okay, but he fought on the South. He was on quote
Yeah,
unquote the
Confederacy.
wrong
Yeah,
side.
yeah,
He must have fought for slavery. Okay. No,
yeah.
well, no. Let's not all jump ahead here.
Right.
No, we're separating it.
Right.
Robert E.
Exactly.
Lee was a brilliant
Right.
general against amazing odds.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
A truly military genius.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean we have to extrapolate from that. You can if you want, but we're talking
the cause of the Confederacy. Yeah.
prowess.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Exactly right. Anyway, he goes on. Military leaders have condemned Trump for possessing autocratic tendencies. And then at his retirement,
military leaders talking about it's not your job, dude.
well, that's exactly it, and that's what's so troubling about this whole thing. New York Times and then the Atlantic is that they're kind of essentially laying the groundwork for the military again turning against Trump, laying the groundwork for a possible coup. When the military say, well, I don't think he's following the Constitution. Oh, I think there's a danger that he'll be an autocrat. Well, the military is not supposed to, we have something called civilian control. We have civilian leadership. We don't have the military making decisions as to what is and what isn't in accordance with the Constitution. The military are supposed to be under the control of civilians, and especially under the control of an elected president.
In criticizing Trump as a fascist and a dictator, they want to turn the United States into a dictatorship too.
Right, exactly. And that's what's so I think creepy and sinister about all these articles, because they're somehow taking the side of the military, who are grumbling and attacking their civilian leaders. And therefore, they're basically encouraging the a new generation of military. Well, he's an autocrat, he's a dictator.
I'm sorry, I'll be skewered for saying this, but when's the U.S. military did something good for America lately?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. And then so Milley says, we don't take an oath to a king or a queen or a tyrant or a dictator, and we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America, and we're willing to die to protect it. But that isn't true. You have to follow the orders of the commander-in-chief. You can't just simply say, well, I know better than he does because I'm following the Constitution. He isn't. That's not your job.
If you feel that way, resign.
Resign, exactly. If you think so, but you can't just say, well, I know better what should be done than he does, and so I will not follow his orders. And that's what he's saying. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or a tyrant or a dictator, and we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. So he's basically saying, I will do whatever I think is right, and I'm not going to pay any attention to the elected president that, according to the Constitution, I'm supposed to be follow his orders. And then over the past several years, Milley has privately told several interlocutors that he believed Trump to be a fascist. Many other leaders have also been shocked by Trump's desire for revenge against his domestic critics. And then at the height of the Floyd protests, Mattis wrote, when I joined the military some 50 years ago, I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Never did I dream that troops taking the same oath will be ordered under any circumstance to violate the constitutional rights of their fellow citizens. But Trump never sent any troops against the rioters. And then it was when the National Guard came in. I mean, it's the governors who can call in the National Guard. I mean, the president can, but Trump didn't do that. But basically, yeah, the National Guard come in if basically the local police is unable to control the civil disobedience. And then, then here's a Trump said that this is of McCain. He's not a war hero. He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people who weren't captured. This is the whole thing with McCain. Again, you're recycling stuff from 10 years ago. And then Trump's reaction to McCain's death in August 2018. And then the president told aides, we're not going to support that loser's funeral. And he was infuriated when he saw flags of the White House lowered to half-mast. And what the F are we doing that for? Guy was an effing loser, he said angrily. Only when Kelly told Trump that he would get killed in the press for showing such disrespect did the president relent. So this is all coming from Kelly. I mean, yeah. So this whole story, whether true or not, Goldberg only knows this. Obviously, this is Kelly telling him. And then it says, in the article, I also report that Trump had disparaged George H.W. Bush, World War II naval aviator, for getting shot down by the Japanese. 2 witnesses told me that Trump said, I don't get it, getting shot down makes you a loser. 2 anonymous witnesses. Bush ultimately evaded capture, but 8 other flyers were caught and executed by the Japanese. That's a kind of a generic thing. It's not like these were people that, Bush who evaded in the same part of the same mission. These were just other naval aviators who allegedly were caught and executed by the Japanese. But that hasn't been confirmed, but that's the story. But to say that somehow they were part of the same mission that Bush was in is that's just misleading. And then the next year, White House officials demanded that the Navy keep the USS John S. McCain, which was named for McCain's father and grandfather, both esteemed admirals, out of Trump's sight during a visit to Japan. The Navy did not comply. Now, one thing we should always remember about John McCain's father, he was the one who essentially did the whitewash on the attack on the USS Liberty. So the USS Liberty, which was attacked by Israelis, he wrote that report, that John McCain's father, that this was an honest mistake. The Israelis just simply made a huge mistake. They didn't mean to attack the USS Liberty. So John McCain did this great service for his country. So it's not surprising that Goldberg should find he was an esteemed admiral. And this is Elisa Farah, typically, blah, blah. And then again, we have Milley. Milley resisted his automatic urges, argued about his many thoughtless and impetuous national security impulses. And then shortly after that story appeared, Trump publicly suggested that Milley be executed for treason. Now, remember what happened with Milley. The issue with Milley was that he had a back channel communication with the Chinese chairman of the Joint Chiefs without notifying the president that he was engaged in these communications. And the thrust of the communication was that, well, don't really worry about anything that may happen, any kind of Trump decision Trump may make, just communicate with me. Ignore Trump altogether. That's what he said about treason. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is basically, he is an advisory. That's his whole role. He's in an advisory capacity. He's not authorized to undertake any kind of negotiations with a foreign power, and particularly not to suggest, well, ignore any statements or actions of the president. And then, so anyway, and then, again,
I think everybody got the gist of what we're trying to say.
Yeah, here. I think so. I mean, I think that, yeah, that's it. So what we've got here is a lot of generals kind of putting out the story, Trump is a fascist, and laying the possible groundwork for military mutiny in the second term, a military coup, a military mutiny. And the media will go along with it because essentially the media have done their job in saying, well, Trump is a fascist, Trump is erratic, Trump is a wannabe dictator, and therefore if the military moves against him, then they would be acting patriotically.
It's really interesting because these are political generals. These are political people.
Yeah.
Okay. These are not people, I mean, General Westmoreland, remember all of that. Okay. General Taylor,
Right.
Yeah, they did exactly what the president wanted, and then they suggested it, and Johnson stupidly, regrettably went along with it. But these generals, I mean, who the hell are you people?
You're right.
Okay. Why don't you just, stop sticking your beak into this?
Right,
Okay.
right. That's right. That's exactly right.
And like I said, I mean, where's your long track record of success? Okay, I don't see it. Okay,
exactly.
The revolving door. Was this interview done at your mansion on the Hamptons? Okay,
right.
I'm sorry.
I mean,
No
exactly.
respect for these people.
I just find it just extraordinary that these generals, at the most senior level of the U.S. military, would talk like this about a president that they're supposed to serve, and really just saying, disparaging him in this way and saying that they know better than he did, and then about crucial decisions of command, and that's not what their job is. We have civilian control for a reason. The American people, they've made it clear in the Constitution that they're not going to surrender power to the military. The military have to follow civilians at all times. And these people, Milley, Kelly, and others, they're pretty much saying, "Well, no, I mean this is a fascist. He's a dictator."
Okay, well, we can end on this point here. So, retrospectively, do all these generals that have spoken out, I think, out of turn, I strongly believe that. So, Truman was wrong to fire MacArthur, right?
Well,
would you take MacArthur's side?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Huh? That's right. No, that's exactly right. I mean, that's the thrust of it, because they're saying, well, he's a president. He's a simpleton. Whereas, I'm a professional. I know this, and this, and I understand the Constitution. Whereas Truman or whoever, he's just a professional Pole. I mean, he doesn't know the things that I know. When you go down this path, that's always the sort of the dangerous part, because that happens in many countries where the military, it becomes very politicized and decides that we know better what's good for the country than the elected president.
The military will save us.
That's right. Exactly.
All right. There's a long one, everybody.
Long.
But a lot of history.
A lot of history. But I think it's also useful. I mean, I think this may well be, as you said, the October surprise.
I think it is. Yeah. Well, it's landing with a thud, because it's not going to change anybody's opinion on anything.
Right.
Well, we know who's not going to be in the next Trump administration.
That's true.
All right, everybody, we got to wrap this up here. This is The Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on Local, so please visit us on our site. And tomorrow we have a live stream. 10
a.m. Eastern Time. Please join us. Come with lots of questions. We always love answering questions. So please, homework assignment between now and then, come up with good things for us to discuss. And in the meantime, there's Buddy. Buddy is really very unhappy. That's why he's turning his back, to show his disrespect. He's turning his back. He wants action when it comes to the tip jar. He's not getting it, and he's very bitter. So if you have a few bob in your pocket or behind the sofa cushion, whip them out, dunk them into that tip jar. It'll go down nicely. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology. And above all, Buddy might, show his face one of these days. So remember, if you like The Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.